as we've been talking about doing sketching and that to figure out your form, somehow I lost my TIFF with all my layers, so bear with me. Basically, you can kind of see here that I've even marker rendered it in a little bit so that I can understand what's going on with the shapes and the forms. You know, I've gone in, kind of tried my best to give myself some contour lines, wrapping it around. Now this is just a straight on front view, but even going in and defining, you know, what do my radiuses look like, and taking into consideration the design wherein, you know, I want these radiuses to be smaller and then progressively getting bigger. Part of the reason why I toss in the highlights is that's going to help me understand later on if I want a tight highlight here, then that means that I'm probably going to have a very small radius that's going to get the highlight right in there. Doing a giant big wash on here means that my surface is probably going to be a little bit more flat so that, you know, the highlight comes across it. Same as if you were doing the marker renderings. You know, if you were to do a rounded highlight or surface, then you would get the highlights that would be more rounded. So all this is information that I'm going to use to try to figure out, you know, what I want my contours and my shapes to look like. If you are the designer, kind of like Spencer talked about last time, it's great because you have freedom to tweak and adjust as you would like. If you're not the designer and you're building someone else's model, you know, the more information you ask for or they can give you, the better. You can see even with this, there's some areas that I would probably want to define out more so that I could better understand it. And especially if I was giving it off someone, like I might be saying, okay, well, I want these radiuses, or I want these surfaces to start here, I want this to start here, and this is where I want it, but I want it tighter in here. You know, just to start helping them understand what is the shape that I'm doing, or what do I want them to do. So there's going to be some things on this sketch that we're going to probably modify as we start building it, because there are things that we may not like, but we'll do that at the end, because sometimes what you have to do is model up someone's model and then provide them feedback and say, well, here it is, here are some things I noticed that you might want to consider. Now that's always a touchy thing, because you may be 100% right and you may see a flaw or something that in their sketch physics don't allow it to model nicely, and you come back and, you know, how's it come across as me saying, oh, hey, you may want to make this change to make your model look better. Not necessarily the most diplomatic approach. I usually like to take the course of passive, wherein I'll model something up. I may see some things I don't like, but then I'll do a review and say, okay, here's some areas that I want to make sure I got your design intent correct, following your sketches, because these are some of the things that happened when I build those surfaces. Then that's a back and forth. Now, you as the designer, you know, you can make those decisions yourself to tweak or refine it, or you may need to go back in and give it to a senior senior designer, and they may come back in and look at your model and redline it. Or you may, before you make the changes, you may need to make the sketches and submit it and say, well, here's the model as is, here's what I want to make changes to. So with that said, let me open up Solidworks. Okay, so however you want to apply this to your model, there's different ways that it can be done. So hopefully what this is meant to be is not a, hey, this is how you should do your model, but more if you have a situation like this, here's a method. So first thing, as always, you know, bringing in the reference image, as everybody already knows how to do. And then the very first thing I'm going to do is create my primary lines. Oops. So in this situation, I created all my lines. I sat down. I looked at for the curvature continuous, or sorry, the curvature, to make sure I had an idea of what I wanted. I want this product to have a very forward-facing look, or forward motion to it. So with that said, the motion that I want it to go in is this direction here. I want it to feel as if it is moving this way, whatever this object may be. So for me, when I do that, that means that my curve is going to accelerate greater at the front than it does at the back. Think about cars. The reason cars always look like they're moving forward is because things slope more aggressively towards the front, whether that be because of aerodynamics, styling, or a variety of things. But my curves want to mimic that. So go in, create the curves, and now even with these, with the curves, I'm overbuilding, because just like sketching through, if I try to, let me just, how do I want to do this here without messing things up? Or you know what? Here, let me do this. If I come in and I try to get it dead on, so let's just go right there. And we'll go right there because that looks like where the radius is going to stop. And then I'll click on it. I'll put my show curvature on right off the bat, which it won't show anything because there's no curve to it. But once I start angling it, so now I'll come in, I'll move things around, I'll grab the points. I'll try to get that there. And you can see that I have to spend a little bit more time doing it and getting it to go the way I want it, versus for me, if I just come in, and it's the same as sketch through, I don't have to be as precise. If I come in and I say, okay, well, we're going to go there. And then I've got a little bit more latitude of freedom. Now you can also see that where before I was doing that minutia, but it had my weight going in the other direction, now I'm back to having it going in the right direction that I want. So that is kind of the reason why, even with my splines, I'll sketch through them, and then if I need to, I can trim them back. So, but here's something that I'll show you. I have a lot of radiuses in this, but I could do what I could do. Let me just, I could, instead of going in the way I'm going to do it, what I could do is I could come in and trim everything back. Oops. And then either just put a simple radius in, and then use that as my surface. But now the problem is again, this is nothing more than a simple radius. I don't get that curvature continuity that I like, or that ability to push and pull. But I could come in, let's just make that a construction. I could come in and draw a spline. And then we'll snap it to here. We'll make it tangent. Now you'll see when I make a tangent, it's going to be almost identical to the radius. Just a little bit off. The difference is...
Hello?
Yep.
Hello?
Yeah.
You called me.
Who called who? Okay. Anyways. So what I can then do is come in and I can
Must
adjust.
have been a dial, I guess. Are you associated with a business or something?
Okay. Who's talking?
All right. Sorry about that.
Guys, let's try not to answer phone calls during class, okay? So what you can then do is come in and you can tweak and pull to get that contour or that highlight modification.
Howard?
Okay, hold on 1 second, guys.
Oh, gosh. Sorry about that.
Now, the problem with taking this approach that I find is if I want to come in and I want to adjust this spline, it can become very difficult. I can't just easily move things around like I would want to. And you can kind of see how it becomes unmanageable, a little unwieldy to adjust things because it's got all these different points locked in. So there are people out there that can do it. I personally don't like it because I find it cumbersome. So what I like to do, and it also gives me a little bit more freedom with the way that I want. So what I'll do next is I've got these as my curves. Exit out of that sketch. And then I'm going to use these surfaces, and I just did a quick, simple extrude surface. And I'm going to use these edges to create my primary surfaces. So before I trim them all back, so what I do here is I'll trim them all back. Now the nice thing about this is if I look at it and it's not quite the way I want it, I can adjust. But I'm going to take the exact same approach for my inside or my side curves that are going to pop out. And what I'm doing is I'm creating the edges that I'm going to be able to draw the surfaces along. Trim that back. What's that?
Emma just asked you, is this being recorded?
Yes. Yes, I've got it recording. So there, I'll make the next ones. And then what I'm going to do is I'll do the same with the inset. And I'll, oops. Something happened here. Okay. So basically what I'm doing is I'm creating the boundary lines for 1, 2, and 3 curves that are going to help me to wash these surfaces around. So if I look at this from a side perspective, I've got that curve, and that curve. So that's 1, 2, 3. And I'm going to use those edges to loft my surfaces between there in order to create that point. Now, what those curves look like, whether it's a flat, whether it's convex, whether it's concave, that's going to be something that I'm going to determine a little bit later. But right now, I'm working on getting that edge, and that edge. And because they're all at different heights, I'm creating them on different planes as well. So if I come back into Solidworks here, let me just scroll up here. You can kind of see I've created 1, then I've created 2, and then the next step is to create 3. And then what I'm going to do, so something happened here. Let me just, I got to go back. Somehow I lost something, which was basically trimming these back. So let me, actually that's a great No, I meant to do that. Yeah. So anyways, to remind you guys on how to trim surfaces. So I'm going to come over and I'm going to go to trim surface. And for this, I want to do mutual, which means I want to trim this surface. And what that means is they're all cutting each other. So it's not just one surface is cutting something else. I want them all to interact and cut. So I'm going to cut this, 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 this. And then it asks me here what if I'm going to select what to keep or if I'm going to select what to remove. Basically, rule of thumb is whatever is easiest to get to. So I don't have to rotate my model a whole lot. I'm going to just say I want to keep this, 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 and this. What? Hold on. I did something wrong there. So I want to trim. We'll go with mutual. Okay. And we're going to keep, so see, I'm not quite sure what I did there, but we're going to keep this, 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 and this. And everything that you see there is what's going to go away. Okay. So now the next thing I can do is a couple things. If I wanted to, I could put all my radiuses right in here. And I could just come in, use the radius tool, select on the edge, and add in the radius. Let's go to a side view here and see if we can get it to match up with the sketch. So looks like it matches up with the sketch pretty good. The only problem with this is if I want to do refinement later, and I'll show you guys about that, I don't have much option. So what happens is the radius starts here, it ends here. I'm not going to be able to really adjust that. Now I can go in and I can do the asymmetrical like you guys have seen. Let me just get the right size here. Where what I, so that one, it actually doesn't like that asymmetrical. So it's not working, it doesn't like it for whatever reason. Go back to symmetrical, but I still only have, even if I go in and do curvature continuous, I still only have what I consider a little bit of adjusting, ability to adjust on here. Even if, you know, I can get it pretty close to what my sketch looks like. I mean, that's pretty close to what I sketched. But that doesn't mean that once I get my model or my sketch into 3D that I'm not going to want to change it and refine it, because the reality is as I'm looking at this, I might evaluate and tweak it. So for that, let's just hit accept. Now, again, evaluate, check. So as a reminder, what I have is I have my view, display, tangent edges as phantom. So even though it's a simple thing here, I want to make sure that that is tangent. I can come back in, I can go evaluate, click on it, deviation analysis. It should be 0 across the board, except especially something this simple. So that means there's no angle between this edge or this face and this face. I could go in, take a look at curvature continuous, or sorry, curvature. You can kind of see how it's a nice smooth transition. So where this is a constant, and then you can see here where the rate of curvature increases. If I had, say, red down here or a different color, if it wasn't a smooth transition, I'd be a little nervous. Now, the next thing to do, because I still find that Solidworks just really sucks, what you can do is use the power of Keyshot. So I've already set up a stage in Keyshot, brought the model in, just a basic 3-point light system. Let me update my model in Keyshot. So I can just come in here quickly and I can kind of take a look at things and say, how does it look? Even if I come in and just do zebra stripes, I can take a look and say, okay, you know what? I like it. This is a little bit early for this, but I just wanted to show you guys it, you know, because we will be using this as we go forward, or I'll be demoing that as we go forward. So go back to Solidworks. Now, like I was saying, I don't necessarily like doing this because I don't get the freedom. So what I'm going to do is I'll delete that out. And what I do is I trim back all my surfaces. So if I come in here, what I do is I create lines for where, not only where my radius is going to start, but I go past it. And that's going to give me some freedom. So let me just quick sketch of what I mean by that. So let's say I want my radius to come in here and here. So if that's where I want my radiuses to start, what I might do is I might start it back a little bit further. And the reason for that is right now, if I have this radius, the best I can do is to tighten it up and make it smaller, because I can come in and I can extend that radius and push it out and do that, or get it even tighter. So I can adjust it, and I'll show you how I'll do that. But if I start it back here, then it just gives me that much more of a wiggle room to adjust in case I want to make it bigger or smaller, or someone else does. So also, see, if you notice here, I drew these lines at 90 degrees. But in my model, I don't have them drawn at 90 degrees. Oh. I have them at a slight angle. And really, that gets into, as we start building here, we'll talk about isoparms and that. But you want to try to have your surfaces down the road, you want to build them so that there's a natural curve to them. So if I'm drawing a surface, then when I draw this line here, I don't want it to be straight across or skewed. I want it to be going at a natural, you know, so that curve that I'm going to use is going to be at an angle so that it has a natural flow to follow the path. Does that make sense? I don't feel like I'm saying it properly.
You want it to like flow continuously from the angle, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. Because if your arc is this, you wouldn't take a line like this and have it go across like that. It would start here and go like that. Does that make sense?
Oh, so like follow the curvature of the arc with your line.
Yes. Thank you. That said much better. So what I do is I'll create that. And this is, there's no rhyme or reason. I just kind of, I used my sketch as a guideline, but you can kind of see how I went a little bit past. Some of this comes from, you know, I've wanted to, so the more adjustability I have, the less I have to worry about my model blowing up. So for a simple step like this to move it back a little bit with no real extra effort, it gives me more freedom to adjust and tweak. So I'll come in, I create my split lines. Now let's see, what was bad here? I did bad. Unsuppress. Okay, so I did, oh, there we go. Yay! I just had to look up further. Here we go. So you can kind of see I took that approach up here. So I created the surfaces and then I just filleted them. Did a next fillet. And you can kind of see how I'm not necessarily, I mean, it just doesn't feel all that fun. But then I do an extrude surface. And then a boundary surface. So on that extrude surface, or for that boundary surface, oh, that's right, that's what I wanted to show you. Okay, yes, bad. 3D splines, for so many of you that like to use them. So, I wanted to create a surface to go around and to create that contour. So I'm just going to simply use a 3D spline. So let me just exit out of that, and I'll create a new 3D spline in here. So I'll delete this. So I've got my 3D spline there and there. So I'm going to delete these 3D splines. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in and I'm going to say 3D sketch. And then I'm going to do a 3D spline. And then I'm going to come in. And I'll select that to there. And I'm going to look at it. And you know what? I'm using the angle tool, so it should only go at an angle. So there it is there. I'm going to use that. Looks perfect. Now here's the thing. If I go to a front view, it looks like that. If I go to a top view, it looks like that, and you can see it bowing in. So that surface is all, or that curve is all over the place. Now, what I could have done, or what I could do, is come in and go do a spline from, oops, do a 3D sketch and a spline, and go from here to here, and then go to a side view, so that I'm actually only adjusting it in one view. So now I know that I'm only rotating in one spot. But the problem is, it's still not 100% dead on. So there's still a whole lot of tweaking to do. And the reason that you want to get these right is because when I come back in, let me just undo. If I come in and I loft that now, oops. Oh, hold on. Let's. So if I look at that, that surface looks clean and nice. Now the problem is, if I come to the ends, you've got this weird little bit of an S that you can kind of see. But then if I look there, it comes out and it's not giving me what I want. Now, one of the things too is whenever we're creating boundary surfaces or surfaces in general, we want nice, clean math. So think about this as something that is divided into sections. So if I have a surface, and this is where isoparms come in. If I have a square, the isoparms are really simple. It needs this math or these isoparms are going to tell it what the length is, what the halfway point is, and what the contour is. Now, the more complex the surface, the more isoparms that are needed. But at the same time, a clean surface should always try and have equal spacing amongst all of these. That means that by definition is a clean surface. The computer's not thinking too hard. If I have a surface and I look at the isoparms and they're doing this, and they would go all the way through, it probably means that there is some kind of glitch going on in my surface. Now, even if I'm doing a contoured surface, same thing. I want nice, clean isoparms. And this is where you can kind of see they look just like your contour lines. That should be considered clean. Now, if there was something going on here, you might see something like that happening. But nice, clean, even is what you want. Let's see if I can turn this stuff on here and see what happens. So, a few things that don't get shown when you're modeling your surfaces, and again, this comes back to evaluation in that. What I can do is, for those of you that didn't see, down here at the bottom, there's a little curvature display. I can click on that, and once I turn it on, I think it stays on by default. I can go mesh preview. So here, you start seeing what I'm talking about, the isoparms. Now, they're not that bad because it's a pretty simple surface. But if I look, I can see that all of a sudden this isoparm is doing something weird. Well, that's a reflection of the curve. So it's just a quick way of telling whether or not things are right. Now, what I can also do is turn on Curvature Combs, and you can see here now it shows me the curvature combs for that actual isoparm all the way across. And you can kind of see, let's see if I can do it better from a side view. It doesn't do a very good job. But you can kind of see that it's not necessarily going the way that I might want it. So those things help you to kind of evaluate that surface. But every time you can make this cleaner, that means for a nicer, cleaner surface. So let me just get out of there. Any questions on that? Okay. Oh, no, I don't want that. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I trimmed back all those surfaces all at once, and it kind of looks like, and again, these are all my guide curves or guide surfaces. So what I want to start doing now is building in what those radiuses are going to be, and there's a bunch of different ways that you can do it. So for example, with this one I went with a loft, but you don't always have to use curves. So with the loft tool, I can come in and I say, I want a loft. And I want a loft from this edge to this edge. And we all know that it does the straight line. But what I can also do is I can click on the edge, and I can say, if I click on Start Constraints and End Constraints, I can say on the Start Constraint, I want it to be tangent to that face. And it'll automatically make it tangent. And then I can say for the end constraint, I want to make that tangent to face as well. And then it automatically makes it tangent. Now, keeping in mind, I did post a video on curvature continuity and surfacing that will go into deeper about this. But right now we're tangent, so there's pretty much, it's creating a 3-point arc. But what I can do is I can switch that to go to curvature. Now you can see it's not perfect because I'm starting to get a flat. But what I can do then is I can come in and I can play with it a little bit. So there, that was the old radius that I could have drawn in, but here I'm just going to come in. And now you can kind of start seeing that I'm starting to get that nice transition. I can either pull these arrows, which are really, really, really sensitive, or I can tick down and key things in, which is not always. And your goal is to get a nice smooth transition there. If I come down here, I can increase my density, decrease my scale. But you can also see down here, I've got an inflection. So that might be because I've pulled that out too far. So that's where it's nice to have the scale up high. But then I can come down, and this is where, you know, you're tweaking, you're adjusting, and you're finding what works right. So that's one way of doing that. Let me get that back. Now, the other way is to do it as a boundary surface. So I like boundary surface because it seems to be a little bit nicer. Now, boundary surface, you don't have to have all 4 boundaries. You just need any boundary. So you can treat it the exact same way. Also, you know, so if I come in, I'm going to say I'm going to do a surface from here to here. Now, I also find it nice. I believe the boundary surface came afterwards. That's why they got a few nicer features. I don't have to keep going back over here. I can come in and say, okay, let's go curvature to face. Let's go curvature to face. You can still see how that's not quite the way we want it. Let's look at this in a side profile. We'll get that there. So we'll say that that's good. Now sometimes this can be a pain, so you may just want to turn them off. But you can see I have a little bit more freedom to do this. Now I can say there, we're good. Now the other way I could have done this as well is I could have drawn a spline from this edge of surface to this edge of surface and created a plane. So I'm not going to worry too much about that this time because I'm happy with the boundary surfaces. Let me just undo to get back to... Oh. So, and again, you want to check and evaluate things as we go. So for here, let's just update.
So is boundary surface kind of like hitting the tangency to face, but it gives you more control?
Yes. So
Okay.
boundary surface gives you a phenomenal amount of control, whether it be from between curves or whether it be from surface edges. So,
Okay.
and that's kind of how you can kind of look at these surface tools. Extrude, really the basic. You can pick a direction you want it to go in, and that's about it. Same as revolve. You can pick an axis, and that's about it. Well, here, it's a little bit more because you can actually control the direction or the path that it goes along. A little bit more here because now you can use multiple cross sections or multiple curves to loft the surface through, as well as use guide rails. And then here, you know, you can use multiple boundaries. It's a little bit more heavy math data, so it understands how better to do curvature, continuity, pulling and playing, and it can help give you a cleaner surface. Fill surface, if used right, it can be a wonderful tool, and it allows you even more freedom because you don't necessarily have to be restricted by 4 sides to create a surface. So pretty much get the outside shape. We're going to come down, do the exact same thing to the inside shape. And again, you can kind of see how I'm almost following the exact path that I did for my sketch. If I come back to my sketch, and it doesn't mean this is how you have to do it. For me, it like when I draw or when I sketch, I'm going to sketch these lines first. You know, it's what I do. You know, I'm going to get my outside profiles done, and then I'll do the next ones, and then I'll do the radiuses as a secondary thing. So it's the same way that I build my models, because in my mind, the radius isn't driving my model. This curve is. This radius is a secondary thing. So I want to get these surfaces or these curves built, and then I want to get these surfaces built to get those radiuses in there. So this is kind of like I've talked about before, you know, understanding what is your primary and secondary surfaces. So let us come down here. We got a loft fail here. Let's see what that was. I forget what I did there, but you can see obviously something didn't go right. Oh wait, I know, hold on. You know what, we're not going to worry about that. I don't remember what I wanted to show you there. Okay. Oh. Something just happened. Bear with me. Okay.
Were you trying to show us how to use like a 3D sketch with the lofting form and then how it would fail?
Yeah, I think so. And in the process of doing that, I blew something up. So bear with me. Let me just do this. Okay. Ta-da! There, I've made all my things. But I lost Keyshot. Let's see what happens here. Oh no, it's back. Okay. So, I've got all my corners now. I'm going to come in. And I'm going to knit my surfaces all together. And the reason why I want to knit my surfaces together is because I'm going to loft things. So if I was to come in and select something, right now this is all considered a separate face. 1 face, 2 face, 3 face. Whenever there's the blue line in between it, that means that this is a surface that has 4 sides to it. It's got 1, 2, 3, and the 4th side down there. So if I was to try to do a loft or something all the way around this whole profile, let me just do that as an example quickly. So if I was to take a line there, put a line there, and then let's say I wanted to have this go all the way around. I could come in here, we're going to select the profile, and then I can select the guide curves. And what it says is that it's an open loft and I can't do it because it doesn't know where these end pieces are. So it's not considered one solid edge. It's an edge from multiple bodies or multiple surfaces. So if I come in and knit everything, and here's a good example too. If I come up here and I look at my surface bodies, I've got a whole lot of surface bodies. The moment that I stitch them all together, and I'm going to stitch that one, all of a sudden that's now considered one surface. Made up of multiple surfaces, but that viewed as one surface. So now what I can do is when I do it, I can select multiple edges, and I'll show you that in a second here. When I go with my flat loft, so basically what I did here is I just simply, where's that? Yeah. I went in.
Hey, Chevin,
Yep.
is there any, are you going to be going over taking lofted shapes across like different planes, like curving them and twisting them?
Not today.
Okay,
But
but
there-
later on?
Yeah, there should be a tutorial on there too, already up there about
Sweet.
that.
Thank you.
Yep. So for this, all I'm doing is, a flat loft. So let me just, all I did was select this edge, and it's a closed loop now. So here, let me just delete this so I can do it. So because this is a closed loop now, I can go and say I'm going to loft, and I don't want to use any guide curves. I just want to do a flat. So I'm going to go from here, and we're going to select here. But you see how it only grabs one edge? I don't want to have to try to grab all the edges because I want to do it all as one giant piece. So let's clear that. I can right click, go Selection Manager, and I can click on Select Closed Loop, which what this is. You can kind of see how it all highlights orange now, and say that's what I want. Then the next one, same thing, Selection Manager, and it automatically connects the two. So this is really simple. It's just a flat edge. There's nothing more to it than that. I didn't give it any contour. Chamfered style, whatever you want to call it. And then I've also got one on the inside here. So if we come back, I think that's going to be working here. You can kind of go back and say, how's that look in here? You can kind of see how it's sculpted. Now, if that's the design you want it, we're done and we can move on. But we were going to go for something a little more complicated. But I also want to show you, though, that what you can also do is here we loft it from edge to edge, and then a separate surface, edge to edge. So what we can also do, let me just close this out or suppress it. What we can also do is do multiple lofts to get curvature. Now, the less information you give the software, the less complex the surface is. So you saw on this loft, all I basically did was tell it to go from here to here. All it knows is to go in a straight line. It can't do anything more or less than that. I could come in and say, you know what, on this start one, let's have it do tangent to face. And then you'll see very quickly, if you look at the isoparms, that it creates the round. Now I can adjust it more or less. So you can see I can start playing with things, without having actually add any curves. Now the problem is, because I don't have any curves, all it does is take that information and does it all the way around. So again, less information limits what it can do. So it only knows that it wants to go from here to here, and I've told it to be tangent off that face and to come out a little bit, and I can adjust that even more. But that's all it can do. You can kind of see here too how it's not necessarily doing a very nice thing over here. It's just doing whatever it thinks it can do because it doesn't have enough information, so therefore it's going to guess. So let's just kill that. But what we can do, and this is more if this fits with what you want from your sketch or your design, these are different things that you can do. So what we can do is we can hold on one second. I'm going to assume that what I want is for this to be rounded all the way in one giant surface. That's, let's say that was the design. So I'm going to come in, I'm going to loft. Again, I'm going to do through loops. So we'll go selection manager. We'll select that loop. Then we can go select other. Oops, that's not what I wanted to do. Sorry. Selection manager. So there you see that we've got that. But now I'm going to give it one more piece of information. I'm going to say I want you to go from here to here, but I want you to go to here as well. So we'll do that where we'll select one more loop. And again, selection manager. What? Why don't you want to do it now? That's right, I couldn't do that. Okay, so the reason I couldn't do this is because of this corner. It became too tight. What I mean by that is it's kind of like laying fiberglass or something. As it came around here, it created a crease. But what I could do is instead of trying to do it all at once, because it was just too much information, let's just go from here to here to here. So what it's doing now is it's finding the natural curve to get there. So I can adjust that a little bit by coming back in and go start constraints, end constraints. So let's say the start again. Let's go tangent to face. So didn't like that because there's not enough information. It becomes self-intersecting. So we'll just have none. So I have to basically say, well, that's the best I can do. But then I could come in and do a lofted surface here. Oops. If that's the form that I want. So, I don't know why we got that selected, so let's do that. So if this is the surface and the shape that I'm wanting, then we can go with that. Now that's one full surface. And then, in order to get a little bit more control, because before it didn't know what it wanted to do, it wouldn't put it in. Let's see if we can do it now with a lofted surface. And what we'll do is we'll go from there to there. We'll put that in there. And we'll put that in there. Now it has more information for it to figure out because we've given it a start point and an end point and the four corners versus before it was trying to figure out what it would do in here on its own. And it's not necessarily intuitive. So there, you know, sometimes trying to make one giant surface, although it seems like it might save you a step, takes more time and effort because you're not going to get clean surfaces because it's too much information going on. So if this is what I would want, I would continue going all the way around and keep doing that. Now, let me just see something here. But this isn't what we want, because I want to have more control over what these profiles and what these cross sections are doing. So let us just come back in. We'll delete these out. For some reason, I really wanted to reinforce that 3D splines are bad. So there's another one. Okay, 3D spline, single curved. Let's just see here. So what I did here is I went in and I created 2 boundary surfaces. And I used a 3D spline, and I got a clean one. For as much as I can, I got it fairly clean. And then I lofted it. So if I look at that, it looks pretty good. Until I come down here and I start looking and going, oh, what's going on? So basically up here it knew exactly what to do because it was right by that spline. But the further away it went, the software didn't know that, hey, even though we say, you know, we want it to be the same all the way down here, it didn't know what to do. So it just does whatever. And for that spline, that was the natural orientation. So it twisted on its own. It didn't twist it. And that's what you end up getting. Now, you can kind of see here, these isoparms are fine going here to here, but, you know, fewer isoparms are nicer, but if we look at this, this is just, it's too simple. There's not enough information. So each one of those isoparms represents basically a mathematical element to help define what that surface is doing in that area. And you can kind of see here, the software says, well, there's something in here, we'll put something in here, and we'll put something in here. Whatever happens in between those doesn't matter. So if there's too much of a gap, then the software just tries to fudge it. Oops, I don't know what I wanted to do. So let's just exit out of that. Now again, could have noticed that with curvature control, you can kind of see there's a whole lot of stuff going on. You know, ideally what we wanted was to have it like this. We could have done zebra striping. Ooh, now that's psychedelic. In this situation, you can kind of see how it's doing all these weird things. So basically, not enough information. Let's just hide all this stuff. Oops. And really learning about how much is enough can take time and trial and error. For me, when I'm doing something like this, I know how much control I want off the bat. So I usually know that, hey, I want to have a curve here and a curve here so that I can control where it starts and where it stops. And then what the paths that go along, whether it be building a surface or building these transition surfaces. Okay. Let me just see something here. Ah, yes, okay. Let's take a 8-minute break, or whatever, 9-minute, be back at 7:20 before I move into creating the surfaces, because there's some stuff I want to do in there. And then we're almost to the end point of this, and I'll show you how to do some refinements, okay?
Sounds good.
Remind me to restart the recording when we get back, please. Okay, so we're back to recording. So where we're at now is we want to create all the curves that are going to help us to create our surfaces from edge to edge. Now, I've told everybody how much I despise using 3D splines for the various reasons that they're hard to control in situations like this. So what I do is I create my splines and I use them on construction planes, or yeah, construction planes. Now, it seems like what I'm doing is tedious, but being meticulous when it comes time to surface build helps you to be able to make changes down the road or to get clean surfaces and not have to chase things down. Again, understanding what you're trying to do. If you don't need the surfaces to be as tight as you want, and if there's a fudge in it and you can Photoshop it out later, great, but you can't really fudge out in a 3D print other than Bondo, epoxy, and refilling it. So remember how way back when I used these edges to create the edges, or to cut back the surfaces where I wanted to put the radiuses in? Well, I want to have my splines go from this edge to this edge. So instead of trying to create reference geometry and setting planes for each one of these, what I do is I come back in. Hold on, where did it go? Shoot, hold on. I have to pull something up here because I've just lost where it went. See, it's a lot slicker when I remember what I'm going to say. There we go. Okay. So what I did was I went back and I took that sketch that had all the individual lines that I trimmed everything back with, and I just did a extrude surfaces. So now I have a surface on each one of those. What you can do is use that flat surface. If you come up to the surface, you right click. I can then use that face as a reference plane for my sketch. So I'm not going in and trying to create all these individual planes. I'm just going to reference each one of these to put my sketch on. So if you can see, let me come down here. There we go. So what I've done is on this sketch, I selected this plane and I sketched on there. And what that allowed me to do was to snap there. So let me just actually, I'll redraw it here. So I'm sketching on this plane. So I know for a fact that it's going to be in this point and this point. And what I can do is come in, draw my spline. And let's say we just want to go with the straight line to begin with. But I can come in, I can select it to that edge and snap to it. And we'll say we'll make it pierce. Same as over here, we're just going to go pierce. Ah, stop. So you can see now that I've got a perfectly straight line from that face, or from the top view, as well as from the front view, even though it is just a line. But if I come in and I go from the top view, I can then click on it, grab my points, and edit it. And what I'm guaranteed to have is a spline that is completely flat, but it pierces through. It's basically a 3D spline created on a 2D plane. Now, sometimes what I'll do is if I'm really looking for, if I'm really early in the stages, I may, instead of just doing a plane, if I want to really explore my forms a little bit, I may have made that a spline, but just a straight line, because what that would allow me to do later on is if I wanted to add curvature to that spline, I could easily just pull the points out and get a rounded face. But basically what I did is I then went and did all the different sections and created those boundaries. Now, whoops. Oh, you're going to do that to me, are you? Hold on. Okay, let me close out, reopen it again. Normally you wouldn't have this many problems, but because I've got so many extra things in here that when I make things, I think I'm breaking them at the same time. Okay. Okay. So on this, a couple different things that you can do. So here I created this surface, and then I created this surface. And then what I did was I created the surface in between. Now the reason I did that is because if I look at this, I've got a control point here, and those controls along there. If I come back and I go edit, let's pull up the, oops. You know, I've got enough data there. If I come in over here, so it's just a short distance that I'm traveling. So I'm not too worried about the surfaces not doing what they should be doing, because it's not much of an area to go for, and it's a fairly non-complex sweep. If I come in and I look at this one, here you can kind of start seeing what we wanted to see when we talked about surfaces going in a path. You can see that my isoparms are flowing with the shape of the curves and flowing with the shape of the surface. That's important because that's also going to control your highlights. You know, so your isoparms are also a great indicator of the direction that your highlights are going to go. Whether they're big, round, or flat, and you can kind of see how this is all tying in with my sketch behind. Now, so here I would create the primary ones, 1, 2, theoretically 3, theoretically 4, and then I would fill in between. And the reason I would do that is because it allows me to do some minute adjustments on the corners. We're not going to worry about that too much today. But what I did though was I also figured out, well, hey, let's try just to do a great big one. So save myself some times. You know, instead of doing 1, 2, and then 3 surfaces, I still used all the same guide curves, but what I did was I did one boundary surface, and I went from one edge all the way up to this edge, and then I told it to loft it in between. So what that allows me to do is just, it's one less surface. It's still a fairly complex surface, and you can kind of see how there's still an isoparm matching for each area. I could come back in, I could turn on my curvature combs because I want to make sure I don't have any weird things happening where it's diving in. And you can kind of see, let's zoom in. I'm getting that shape that I know I want it. So that way, instead of just doing all the individuals, I did one large one. But the problem with that is, let's say I want to tweak just this corner somehow. down the road, I can't really do it because I've got the whole thing. Now, I'm just going to delete that, and let's see what happens if, so I've got all those surfaces. Shoot, hold on. I need my reference curve up. So, let me turn that off. There. So what I'm going to do is just to kind of do a quick demo is what happens if I try to loft it without these extra curves in there. So I can easily do a boundary and go from that edge to that edge. Keeping in mind too, in case you guys didn't notice, when you're lofting something and you pick the edges to go to and from, it needs to understand that they're in the same part. It doesn't want to twist it. So as you can see, when I select, I'm selecting down on the bottom part of the edge, but then I'm also coming over here and I'm selecting the similar area. And once I show you one thing, that'll make sense. So, but then what I can do is I can come in and we're going to go to Selection Manager. Oops. We'll select this. So there, now it knows what it's doing. So let's do the next edge. So you can see how before it did this path, but it didn't know what to do. So now I'm giving it more information. I'm telling it, hey, your other edge needs to follow this. So now we've got it created. But you can see it doesn't necessarily know what to do. If I zoom in here, I'm not sure if you guys can see this, but you can kind of see how the surface does not come in contact with that curve. It's because while it's doing this, it's losing information. It doesn't know what it should be doing around the corner, which is always one of the more complicated areas. So this surface itself is, if I just come in and I hit OK, it's going from round and it's flattening out in areas. It's not becoming tangent, and that's because there's all a lack of information. So, and again, you know, sometimes you'll be like, well, maybe I don't need to build all those curves, and that's fine. Try it without, you know, but then don't forget to evaluate to make sure you can see what's going on. And if it's not giving you what you need, then usually what that means is that you need to have some more curves in there. So let's just go and see if we can. Oops.
Are all those guide curves that you drew in, are you making sure that they're all tangent to that surface that you're drawing like to?
No, I did not. And the reason for that is because, hold on one second. So if this is the one surface, this is the other surface. Oops, let's just do this there. The reason I didn't make them tangent is because I did not want a full arc on it. So that's not what the spline is doing. What I wanted was a spline that did this, so that there's a little bit of an angle there. And the reason I want a little bit of an angle is because in my design, I'm going to put a little ballpoint highlight along there. In order to get a ballpoint highlight, I need there to be a small little fillet. And that's the size of that fillet is going to determine how thick that highlight is. Does that make...
Yeah, so like if you don't draw your guide curves tangent, then like you should always like fillet it later so it is like smooth, like smooth out.
Well, you should always know whether or not, like, do you want a hard edge there? If you want it to look like a really, really hard edge, then you're going to just do a tool break radius.
Okay.
You know?
Yeah.
I think I butchered this and I'm not going to be able to get back to where I want it to be. Give me 1 second. Let me see if I can just get it back. There we go. So for me and for my design, I know that I want there to be a highlight along here. And that's how I adjusted my splines. So that here is the bulk of the highlight and then it should flatten out down here. But then as I get up to the top here, you can kind of see how the highlight gets a little bit more defined. Up at the top, it gets even more so. And then once later on at the end, I add the the ballpoint radius in there, then it will give me that singular pinstripe highlight.
Okay, cool.
So let me... So for the sake of speed, I modified my design and I went with a flat interior surface. But again, let's do a quick check here. So we're kind of getting what we want. Now, this is probably really slow, so let me get away from automotive paint and just go with something plastic. So if you're trying to evaluate highlights, then it's always a good idea to use, a hard, shiny plastic. If you're if you know your material beforehand and you're trying to adjust highlights, then toss that in. So my thought was that this was going to be some kind of shiny thing. So, but I can sit here. Oh, come on. There we go. You can kind of see here where there's that hard edge because it's not tangent. But that's what I want for this model. Now, I wouldn't leave it like that because you can clearly see a distinct line. A lot of apples, they call that a pillowed surface because it looks exactly like that. If you lay a pillow flat, it's kind of got that contour to it, but then it comes to a point. So that's what I'm looking for. Let me see if I can just do a better interior here. I'm not getting the highlights that I want. That's a little better. Okay, so the main thing that I'm looking for is, you can kind of see up top here, that highlight is doing what I want. I want it to pool up here at the front, so it's going to be kind of that fat ball. But then as I rotate it around, you can see how it accelerates and then wraps around that corner. So I'm kind of getting what I want. I don't have all the details in yet, so I'm not getting some of the highlights. If I look here, something doesn't look quite right because it looks kind of a little bit weird. So let's just go back to our Solidworks and see. And part of that is I haven't stitched these yet. So what we're going to do is we'll come back, we'll knit everything up. So again, I'm looking at this, I'm evaluating it. I have black lines here, dashed lines here. So that means that I know for a fact that those are not tangent, they're not curvature. There is a true edge there. If I was to run my finger over it, I would feel that edge. That was what I wanted for my design intent based off of the highlights. We'll come in, we'll just add some fillets in. I don't think I added that fillet till later. But even as we add a fillet, I'll still jump back and forth. So I do a lot of, like you can see here, I can see the highlights in SolidWorks, not too bad, you know, but it's not necessarily the best thing to look at. I grew up using Alias, which just was oh so beautiful from a highlight standpoint. But I'm still going to do this and check in here and see what it is that I want. I'm also noticing down here, I don't know if I necessarily like this, what's going on. So kind of feels a little bulbous there. Might have gotten away from me somehow. I may not have paid much attention to my design, or I may have paid very good attention to my design and I'm just now seeing it in 3D versus 2D, and I'm looking at it and rotating it, because obviously in here I can't rotate and move the sketch around. But now I'm kind of looking at it, and if I look at my curves, I can clearly see that the lines I'm tracing down in here, yeah, there is something bulbous in there. I'm not liking what it's doing. This is kind of, how can I do this here? Thin here, gets fatter there, gets flat transition there, and then comes around there. So it's not doing what I thought it would in the sketch, you know, where it's just not doing what I wanted it to do. And I'm not liking the look of it. So that's going to be something that, hey, I'm going to look at later. First, let me just kind of finish it off, because I want to make sure I get far enough to properly evaluate the model. So we've got that radius dumped in. Now what I'm doing is I want to mirror it over. So I just created a quick little cut plane that is at the center, so I can trim all the surfaces back. And I'm going to go through this part fast because you guys are used to this. And then I'm going to come in, I'll mirror that over. I want to knit it. So again, I know I'm tangent in the center. Oh, that's not what I do. Okay, so here, for the most part, I'm going to say, based off of my side profile, I'm done. But I want to look at this and evaluate it, because if I look at a few things, not necessarily enjoying this transition around this corner, not enjoying the relationship of this with this. So this is where, again, I would bring it into Keyshot, just to make sure that it's not Solidworks. Like, well, these lines clearly aren't Solidworks. These are clear, sorry, let me rephrase that. It's nothing to do with highlights. These lines are ugly, in my opinion. You know, it's not a smooth transition. It feels cumbersome and awkward. It's one of those things where it's like, well, either follow this edge or follow this edge better. What's it going to be? So, but we want to come in, look at it, do some evaluations, because keeping in mind, you're never going to be looking at it straight on like that. So you always want to evaluate things as you would see it. But even as I do this and I look at it, I can see that line here. It doesn't feel as awkward when I look at it in perspective, but it still doesn't seem to do what I want it to do, especially when I'm rotating around here and I starts feeling just weird, because it's nice and consistent, and then it seems to get a lack of curvature, a lack of whatever in there. So that's where now, you know, we talked about it before. Okay, hey, I'm going to go back to my sketch, you know, because I'm going to make changes. You know, this area, whatever sketch I need to do to make it so it reads. But the key thing is I want these three surfaces to be nicer. If I look at my rendering again, and this is where I would do the printout of the rendering. I don't know if I necessarily like it up here, but then as I look at it too, it's one of those things, well, oh, okay. So I did exactly what the designer asked for. He asked for that side view. I did a pretty good job of matching up that side view, but I made the assumption that as I modeled this, I did not have a front view, so I assumed that it did that, and it was flat across the top, versus what could it have been? It could have been round to give it a little bit more sculpted shape. So, two things. I either one, didn't sketch enough, if it was my design, to make sure, or I didn't think about that, or I should have gone back to the designer and said, hey, you know, could I have a cross section or two? What could I have? Now, there are lots of things that you can do in SolidWorks. So for this, I'm going to assume that, you know what, I don't want to go all the way back and start off by building these surfaces with curvature to it. So let me see if I can do a quick fix. So for this, I'm just going to delete all the faces. And now I can go in and I can build something in between. Knowing that when I do this, I'm somewhat limited because I've got these curves. They're going to control the shape. But I can come in and create a boundary surface. And basically what I did was just like what we saw before, where hold on. Let me turn some of that stuff off. Wait, come on. What I did was, there we go. I said, okay, you know what? I'm going to try to curve. I'm just going to loft a surface from here to here. So I need a center spline. I'm going to raise it up so I get that kind of an arc. So what I did is I just created a sketch and I offset this just enough to quickly get a form up there. Did it 3 millimeters. And then I went in and I did the boundary surface and I lofted it through those sections. Now, if I look at this, okay, is it enough to read the form and to say, hey, that looks good? You know, as I'm looking at this, it looks not bad. The highlights go across. Let us then knit it up. We'll go back in, as always, check in Keyshot. Okay, not bad. Much nicer. I like the nice and roundness. And this is one of those things. How can I get a quick look and feel before I have to go all the way back and redo something if I don't need to? Or does that look good enough? So I'm getting the highlights that I want. Now let's go back to the surface. I know personally that what I just did was not necessarily the nicest. What I would have wanted done in the very beginning was to create, if I wanted that top curve, what I would have done is created a spline that I want that top center line to do, and then I would have created a curve like this. So where what I did originally was I just took it and I extruded it back like that, so it was a flat surface. What I would have wanted to do was to take a curve and sweep it along a path, so that in the top I would have had that crowning right in the primary surfaces. So right at the beginning. What I'm trying to do now is cheat and see if it works. But it looks good. We got the tangents and everything, but if we come back, and again, when we build, we want to evaluate. It's just like your design. it's okay to have mistakes in your design as long as you know they're there and what the purpose is of them. Same as doing a presentation. You should know 6 things wrong about your design that you're not happy with or that other people might not be happy with, in hope that they only notice one thing. But if I come back in and I use those tools, I'll do a mesh preview. So still looks pretty good from a mesh preview standpoint. But if I come in and I do curvature combs, and let's just kind of turn those way down. Let's just go with the cross here. You can see, I'm trying to get a view that's pretty good. It's not bad, but in this, so there it's smooth, but down here in the front corner, you've got a little bit of a wobble. Now that's actually pretty small, so it may not even show up in a rendering, which if all you're doing is a rendering, then great, not a problem. But I know it's there. I would probably want to spend time cleaning that up and doing it right if this was going to be produced or something of that nature. Okay, so we finish it off. We say, okay, so we rounded that out. That looks good. We like it. Let's do an update. Take a look. And we can say, yep, like it. Highlights are good. Still don't like what's going on down here. So now this is... So there you see we've got our pinstripe highlight in there again. There I'm following the highlight because I just want to see what the reflections and the highlights do as I roll around. So we're going to say I like that, I'm happy, but there's some things that I'm not too impressed with. This being one of them. Now here is one of the big advantages of overbuilding things, trimming them back, and making sure that you're keeping connectivity good. Now I say this, and I've already tested this, and it worked once, so let's see. This surface, as we talked about before, everything is based off your curves. If I go to a side view, this is all driven off of, even though this surface, you know, is way down on the road, this is all built off of my first original curves. So if there's a problem with my first curves, then there's a problem with every surface that goes after it. So if I'm wondering, well, why did this happen? Well, if I come back and I go to my first curves and I look at it, and it's like, okay, so there's that. We'll show those. Let's take a look at our second curves. We'll show those. And then let's look at our third curves. We'll show those. Oh, whoops, hold on. There was a really cool thing I learned just today. So I want to go primary curves. I'm going to right click and sketch color. I'm going to make them green. I did not know I could do that. So everything on that sketch will now be green. Makes it easier just to see. So I don't know if you guys knew that. If you're excited as I am, I don't know. I don't care.
I'm excited. How'd you do that again?
Okay, good. One of you. Awesome. So you go to the sketch plane, you right click, sketch color.
That's all it takes. Cool.
That's all it takes. And I'll be honest, the reason I'm so excited is because sometimes when I have a whole bunch of sketches up, looking at them all can be hard on the eyes. So, but
I don't know why Solidworks has a default of blue anyways, because some people are colorblind with blue.
Yeah. There's a lot of things Solidworks is not very good at from a user UI standpoint. So, but if I go back and I look at these lines, so I'm liking up here, you know, and I'm liking here, but I have a nice, smooth, consistent transition between those. You know, if I turn on my curvature comb for that one, okay, that's not bad. Turn on the curvature comb for this one. Okay, so this is considerably flatter and longer than this one. Not sure if I necessarily am happy with that. So the question is what do I want to do? I think for this point, what I would be happier with is if I was to get rid of this whale tail or this flare between there, and I kept it a little bit more consistent. So I'm going to come in, oops, edit my sketch, and I'm going to just kind of adjust things a little bit. What I really should do is turn that back on. Shoot, that's not what I wanted to do. Okay, hold on one second. So let's say I'm going to play with this and get the shape that I want it to be. So by editing that, I'm getting it to be a little bit nicer than what I had. I don't know if anybody can actually see that it looks nicer. What we can do though is, because I want to compare it to what I had, I'm going to, instead of hitting update keyshot, I'm going to hit send to keyshot. Let's see if this works. So I'm going to come in, no, it's not going to let me do that. Okay, so here's what it looked like, where it was a little bit fatter. Now let's go into here and we'll hit update. Let's see if I didn't screw it all up. So we got it a little bit better. Did anybody see anything different? Or am I imagining things?
I think this is the same one. Wait, no, never mind. Wait.
Does it look better? Here, let's do this. So I'm going to close that out.
I think the white one was your new model. This one's your new model. Wait. The white one was your new model, Travis.
Okay. So let me just see if this is going to do what I want here first. So let's just do something to exaggerate it. So we'll come in and we'll do that. We'll hit update. Now the goal is to have all the surfaces update. So you can see there whether this is nice or not. By being a little more methodical, I am changing the very, very first curve that I created, and my whole model is updating. So I can come back in, update the keyshot. This should update now. And I can say, oh, shoot. Well, maybe it looks better, maybe it doesn't. I don't know. But I'm going to come back and I'm going to say it doesn't. So let's just kind of adjust this a little. Now the only thing I did wrong is I can't see what my old sketch was. So what I should have done is I should have copied this, turned it into a guideline so I could have seen where it was, in reference to what I'm doing now. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, but I'm going to say, you know what? I'm looking at this. I have more of a consistent width along here. So I'm happy with that. I can also sit here and say, well, you know what? I don't like how far this sticks out, or I want it to stick a little bit further out. So if you recall, I went back in, and when I did the curves off the offset or the inset, hold on, let me see, third guide curves, second, give me 1 second here. There we go. No, so that's inset. I'm just trying to find one thing here. Okay, I think I should be able to do this. So these curves were created off of this plane for the red curves that are the furthest out. I can come in and I should be able to edit this, and I should be able to, let's say, move it out further. Let's see what it does for me. Theoretically, it should just stretch things out. So yes, stretched it out a little bit too far because it started getting a problem. So I mean, sometimes there's only so much you can tweak and adjust. But you should be able to go back and do some changes. If I want to come back in, I can adjust these curves. And the goal is to get the ability to have the model update as much as you want. Knowing that at this point, the way I did edge to edge, it's not as easy to just make a whole lot of changes. That's why you want to adjust and tweak as you go. So if I'm doing changes at this stage where I'm going back in, ideally, I want to be doing refinements. Some of that could be, let's go with the corners. I want to go with the second corners. So let's go with the first corners and let's see what we can do here. We will come in. Oh, and you can see how I can't see what that is because I've covered it up with this surface. So if I actually come in and I edit it, it's going to be this bottom one here. So if I'm going to change that, I couldn't actually see what it was updating. So let's just, sometimes having too much of the display on slows things down graphically. So I can come back in and I can adjust things, and someone says I want that tighter. So basically what I'm doing here is as if someone came in and said, you know, looks great, but I want this to be really, really tight. Okay? Get rid of that hanging out there. Let's do this. I can go back in my model, or if I want to, I can go back in my model and I can adjust how far that radius came out. And I can get it to be much tighter. Hit OK. Theoretically, this is one of those things where, you know, you'll see designers cross their fingers. Now I've changed the design, whether I like it or not, but I can go back in. And part of that is because doing things individually allows you to do adjustments, especially if they're all tied off of each other. So that's kind of the reason why the approach I took and the approach that I wanted you guys to take is, what are my primary things that are controlling this? You know, if there's no sense in me trying to build this and sweep this edge, if this radius is going to be what drives the overall form. If if I look at this model and I look at this form and I say, well, if I want to make a major change to this design, oh, that's ugly. Let me just, I think I just blew everything up. Yeah, I'm not sure what I did there. Woohoo! Anyways, let's go back here. As long as I don't hit update. If I look at this and say, okay, if I want to make major changes to this design, what are going to be the biggest bulk changes? You know, so for this concept, this profile really defines my design. So getting this primary shape is going to be one of the key things. And if I want to make major changes, this profile is going to be what's really going to make it much more dynamic in shape. So with that said, I started with these curves. Then the next thing is if I want to make this again, so these top surfaces where they intersect, those are really controlling it. The next thing that's going to make it is the transition from the curves from here to here, those radiuses. By making those larger, smaller, bigger, tighter, I can really change the dynamics of this design. I can make it look more aggressive, less aggressive, you know, so that's why I built those surfaces separately so that I could tweak and pull and adjust them. Now, everything that I had an understanding of what this surface was going to be, you know what, let's get rid of something. Where's our rubber? No, come on. There. Where was I going with this? Oh, so this contour and this, I can make adjustments to it and tweaks, but that's going to affect the highlights, but it's not going to affect the overall form. That's why I put those in. And then I didn't put those radiuses or those pinpoint highlights in because into the splines, because one, I never like doing that. I always want to put my fillets in separate versus trying to build it in with the spline fully, especially for small ones. But I put the fillets in last because that's going to be, you know, an even deeper detail. But if I want that highlight to be fatter, thicker, I haven't shown you guys yet how to do variable radiuses, but if I wanted to do a variable radius, that's going to be kind of the last detail thing I did. So again, very much the same way that I personally sketch, and putting that level of detail in as I go. It kind of really, for me and for what I've taught, ties in with how I model. It's very similar. It's the same way that I learned how to do Class A surface modeling was by going out and watching a bunch of amazing clay modelers just drag clay. Because the way they were dragging it and shaping their clay was the exact way that I needed to create my surfaces to mimic real world. Questions? No questions. I'm going to stop the recording.